So then it comes to my most favorite part. It's the Android runtime. Now the Android runtime is made of three things. One is the Dalvik virtual machine. Second is JIT. And the third one is a set of core libraries that provide the most functionality. Right? Now this set of core libraries, what they do is they are directly mapped to the bottom layer, which is the Linux kernel. So which means they provide seamless integration once again. Right? So the Dalvik virtual machine and the JIT are two interesting things to talk about, so we'll jump into them right now. The Dalvik virtual machine was made by this guy called Dan Bornstein, and he named it after a village in Iceland called Dalvik. That's why he named it. So at the highest level of abstraction, what Dalvik virtual machine does is it takes an application before it runs and it converts into this thing called as a text file. Now this is at the topmost level and it does this so that it can save on memory and the processing speed. Let's face it, we all have very bad phones. It has such low processing potential, such low memory, probably 512 or something like that. There is one guy here with a fancy mobile phone though, with a very high processing speed and stuff. But yeah, that was now. That is now. Now before, what happened was we didn't have much processing potential and memory. So that's where these text files come into play. That's why the Dalvik virtual machine was invented, so that you can take advantage of this whole thing. Right? Now in order to understand this better, let's differentiate between Java virtual machine and the Dalvik virtual machine. Okay. Now the Java virtual machine is something called as a stack-based architecture, and the Dalvik is something called as a register-based architecture. Okay, again I know that this is too much on the top of your head, so it's probably going meow. So I'll tell you more simply. So when you're executing a set of instructions, let's say a virtual machine is executing a set of instructions, what happens is it needs to fetch that instruction, it needs to understand what the instruction is saying, and it needs to execute the instruction. Right? So when we look at a stack-based architecture, what happens is everything is stored within a stack, so it's one after the other. So what happens is, in order to understand one instruction, it needs to be taken out of the stack, it needs to be understood, and then it needs to be executed. So that's 3 machine cycles, right? Now when you move to a register-based architecture, what happens is all the information, all the instructions are already stored in register. So there are only 2 things that you need to do. You need to understand what the instruction is doing, and you need to execute the instruction. Okay, so you might say, okay fine, 3 minus 2 is 1, there is only 1 machine cycle that's being saved upon. But when you're talking about a mobile device with such low memory, 1 machine cycle is a lot of memory saved. Okay, so that's the basic difference between the Java virtual machine and the Dalvik virtual machine. Now, the Dalvik virtual machine uses this thing called DX. It's a utility, that like a command line utility that is used to convert these things into text files. So what it does is it takes some classes, not all of them, probably some of the classes it takes, and then it gives out what is called as a text file. Now the text file is something like a jar file, but a little bit lighter. Probably its size is lesser by a few %. Okay, and that is because what it does is 3 things. The classes over there, if there are any repetitions in the classes, then it omits them and only puts that which is necessary. Okay, and the Java bytecode up there is converted into a Dalvik standard, which means when you compile to a dot class, the bytecode that's there is pop encode execute style. But then when it comes to Dalvik, it needs to be encode execute. So it needs to translate that. That's what the DX utility does. And the other resources such as strings and all that stuff are just maintained like that without duplicates, of course. So that's enough of overview of the Dalvik virtual machine. Let's move to JIT. Now JIT says it's a method to improve the runtime performance of computer programs. That is very vague. So let's dwell a little bit into it. We'll look at the modes of runtime operation. We have an interpreter and we have a compiler. Again, going back to school days, they'll say interpreter is translated from a high-level language to a machine code continuously during every execution. And a compiled code is translated into machine code before execution, and it requires the translation only once. So these are the 2 things that we have right now. Now what the just-in-time thing tries to do is it tries to bring about an integration between both of them. So you don't have 2 definitions, you just have one. It says it's a hybrid approach with translation occurring continuously as in an interpreter, but with caching of these translated code to minimize performance degradation. So the point of where a compiler was there was caching, so that it doesn't need to reuse some code. So that it can reuse some code. But when you're talking about interpreters, it needs to do the things line by line. If you work with QBasic and C, you'll know the difference. QBasic was an interpreter and C was a compiler, right? So that's what the just-in-time does. So that's about the middleware. When we move into the operating system, this is not a very interesting part, but it's an open platform, which has already been said, and it helps people build rich and innovative applications. It helps them to take advantage of the device hardware and location info and all that stuff. Now the one interesting thing is the core applications that are built, like Gmail, search and all that stuff. They use a certain set of APIs. If it was, let's say, Apple, it's going to restrict those APIs because it's going to be selfish and say, hey look, I'm the only one who can use all these things. But Android isn't like that. They allow all of us to use the same APIs that are used by the core applications itself. And this improves on reusability of the components. Right? And when you talk about the operating system, there are some things that you need to know. They're called views, content providers, resource managers, notification managers, and activity managers. These things are a little high as of now. We'll get to them a little bit later. So now when we move on to key applications, they are written in Java. They are the core applications and they are written in Java. So these are some of the applications. Can anyone name all of them? One by one. First one. Okay. Second one? Huh? No, second one is contacts. Third one? Fourth one? It's already there. So that's much about the key applications. There is not much to dwell into that. They're just built on Java, that's it. So this is the software stack that, these are the layers. And you know that thing that I read in the first, in a very monotonous voice? Let's read it again, but let's read it keeping these things in mind. So, and a little bit edited as well. So it says the Android open source software stack is based on the Linux kernel and consists of Java applications running on a Java-based object-oriented application framework sitting on top of core libraries written in C. In addition, the runtime consists of a Dalvik virtual machine running GIT compilation. I'm pretty sure all of you got that right now, right? So, okay, now let's talk about native applications. It's the last topic, so you guys can relax. So, when we talk about native applications, I'm going to tell you that they are done in Java. This is probably the 50th time I'm repeating this. Right? So, they are programmed in Java, and in accordance with the Android SDK, you get what is called as an Android package. Now, this Android package has a very fancy name on the internet called as an APK. So this, when you say an APK, it's something like your installer, something like your where you double click and it installs and stuff like that. It's like that, but just for the Android. So that can be one example of an APK. Please tell me you recognize that thing. Thank you. So let's say we take this APK and we deploy it on the phone. So which is basically installing. All you need to do is one single click and you can play all you want. So that's all you have to do. There's not much of any complexity involved in installing an application on Android or anything like that. Okay, so when you have a particular application that's installed, what happens is something very interesting. It runs within its own security sandbox, which means that it's not allowed to interact with other applications. It's not allowed to interact with other applications without necessity, right? So if there is necessity, there are ways to do it, but if not, it sits within its own sandbox and does its stuff. Like for example, let's say you're playing Angry Birds. So you hit 3-4 clicks and you get like a major high score. Now you want to publish that high score onto Facebook. That's when Angry Birds needs to interact with something called, with Facebook, for example. So until then, Angry Birds can exist as its single process. That's why it stays within a sandbox. Okay. Now how this is done is they took advantage of the whole Linux-based platform and they run each application as a separate user. So when it runs as a separate user, they are associated with its own user ID. So you can kill the application whenever it requires. There is a pkill command for all those. So, and also you can associate permissions with it. So when you associate permissions with it, there are only certain stuff that they can access based on the permission level. Okay. And the second thing is we've already seen that they run in their own virtual machine. So when they run in their own virtual machine, that itself gives you a level of isolation. You don't need anything more. So all this together is what Android calls the principle of least privilege, which means each application by default has access only to the components that it requires to do its work and nothing more. So this is a very nice thing that Android has come up with, majorly because when you look at PCs, what happens is since every application has access to data, you build an application that has access to the entire file system, I build an application that has access. So that is majorly why the viruses are able to take so much of advantage of the whole thing and mess things up for our very well-known Windows machines. It's not the case with Linux machines just because of this. It has an extreme level of security with permissions and stuff. So even there is, I don't know if you guys knew, there's nothing called as an executable file in Linux. How many of you knew that? Zero? Okay. So any file can be executed in Linux in the sense you can give it a permission and say that you are executable, and if there is code inside it that can be executed, it will be executed. That's how Linux works. Right? So, okay, now we'll talk about the application components. So this is where I spoke about the earlier thing, where there are activities, services, content providers, broadcast receivers, and intents. These 5 things are like the guru of, like the foundation of the whole Android thing. And now these are what makes Android its happy-go-lucky self. So let's look at this one by one. I'm not going to dwell more into it. But now the activity is called as the single smallest independent entity. Now it's a single screen with the user interface. So what happens in application we build now? So let's say we're building a .NET application or something. We'll have like 1,000 screens and stuff like that. But what Android does is it separates them into these things called activities. So let us say login, for example. The login screen will be one activity. The home screen will be the second activity, and stuff like that. In this case, the inbox is one activity. It's one separate user interface with its own associated piece of code. Now, if you say why it's done this way, is any one single activity in Android can invoke another activity. So, if you've used an Android phone, and let's say you want to, I don't know, upload a picture up to Facebook, when you say upload picture, it opens Android's own gallery. It doesn't open up a Facebook gallery, for example. That's because Facebook is saying, hey, look, I want to upload a picture. I want to allow a person to upload a picture. So let me search for a picture on your phone. That's how activities work. They are a single small independent cell that makes things so much more easier if you look at it from a mobile standpoint. So the next thing is services. And I say never underestimate the quiet guy in class, because even though they don't talk a lot and stuff, they do their stuff. Right? So it runs in the background performing long-running operations like fetching. Okay, for example, if you have a Twitter application running, you are constantly fetching feeds. Now that constantly fetching feed is done by a service. So another example would be music, and it's obvious that they don't have any user interface associated with that. Now the third thing is content providers. Now what content providers does is it manages a shared set of